Hi guys, so today I'm going to take you through the journey of me starting to design a dress right through to the final product. So I've had a few friends that are interested in the whole process and I'd love to share that process with you guys today. So my latest plan is I'm just going to design a dress whenever I have an event to go to. Otherwise I just end up with all of these half-finished projects that I never end up getting back to because I don't have a purpose to finish it. So my latest event, so I'm going to one of my best friend's 30th birthdays this weekend, and the event is going to be, I think it's going to be very classy. It's at a wine bar. So I want something that's a bit different, but still has a little bit of modest, sexy feel to it, I guess. So lately I've been absolutely loving Zimmermann's designs. Still the statement sleeves are absolutely carrying through in the fashion through to winter. So my first part of the process, what I do is I go to our local Fabulous Fabrics design store here in Perth. Their fabrics are absolutely incredible. So they stock fabrics from Italy, all over the world. We are so lucky to have a store that we can support locally here in Perth and have it at my fingertips. I definitely have some other favorite fabric stores around Australia that I do source when I can get to Melbourne. I love going into Tessuti and a few of the other fabric stores in Melbourne, but like I said, we're very lucky to have this store in Perth. So this fabric here is what I've picked for the 30th birthday party that I'm going to, and I just love it. I think it's got a real Valentino / Zimmermann vibe to it. And when I was explaining to the ladies in the store what I was going to do with it, they were like, oh, that's a bit different. And this design that I've come up with for this dress, I wouldn't say this fabric particularly lends itself to that design, but I think it's going to be really good and hopefully my vision comes to light. So talking about the design of this dress, the exciting part. So when I first saw this fabric, that real Zimmermann vibe is what came to mind. So this was my original sketch. Now I don't actually sketch very often. I had this completely visualized in my head, but it's like when I'm trying to explain my designs to other people, that's when I need to try and draw it. So I'm not very good at sketching at all, but that was my effort. So you'll actually see along the process though that I end up changing the skirt because I find it's quite voluminous in the top and there's a lot going on in the top, that I've ended up doing a dropped waist on the design. So the skirt drops from here and it has a little bit more flare through here. I do really like this idea of this like asymmetrical hemline on it, but with the soft Italian silk, it's very difficult to have more of that structured design. So look, I think the dropped waist with a little bit of free flow in the fabric really works for this design to try and balance the sleeves and the detailing that's going on around there. One of the other design components that I've wanted to do for so long, and I'm so glad that I finally get to do it in this dress, is a big statement collar. So I'm very excited to see that come to light. Okay, so let's quickly talk about price point of dresses. So when I shop for myself, price of fabric isn't something that I pay a lot of attention to, because if I have a design in mind or I get inspired by a piece of fabric, it's likely that I'm just gonna go and purchase that piece of fabric to make it, because it's a one-off dress. I can go to an event, no one's gonna be wearing the same thing as me. And it's, it has that real personal feel to it. So when I was making dresses for clients, that is something that you have to be very careful about, because if you don't care about the price of your fabric and then you put all of the components of the cost of a dress together, it can absolutely, blow above the $500 mark. And that's not something that, there's definitely a clientele for it, but I think, when you look at surveys that we see on our racing fashion pages and stuff like that, people probably don't want to go too far above that $500 mark. So for example, this fabric was $90 a meter, and for the design I needed 2.5 meters. So that's just for this. Then I've purchased buttons, lining. So yeah, and then you've got your notions, which is like your zip, cotton, thread, all of that sort of thing. You know, it quickly adds up. So with all of that, the cost, the base cost of this dress is $280. And then once you add people's labor and time onto that, that gets you a package. And what most fashion businesses actually do is you get that base cost and then you at least double it. So, you know, if we're looking at this dress just from the fabric cost, you know, you're looking, you know, $540 for a dress minimum, this cost, and that's not even including my time, or your seamstress's time. So with when I was doing Bel Capello, you know, I paid to source a seamstress in Australia, and, you know, I was paying her between $30 to $40 an hour, where, you know, you look at some fashion companies and they actually, you know, they obviously don't source within country. They go overseas and pay their seamstresses a lot less than that. So that was something that was very important for me. And I guess that's what also determined the price point of Bel Capello dresses at that stage. So anyway, time frame for this dress that I'm doing today, we're looking at about I'd say about 2 hours for cutting out, because I'm completely lining it. And there's more than just cutting out a dress. Like when you look at this fabric, you know, when you're cutting things out, you need to be careful that you're not cutting a seam straight through a flower, and, you know, you've got to match your seams up for different things. Okay, so with selecting a pattern, the process I've gone with this dress is I found the fabric, I was inspired by that. Then I had a vision for what I wanted the design to look like that I showed you the sketch for. And the next process for me is I actually have this very messy box full of pattern pieces. And I don't actually often buy patterns, because once I find a pattern of a neckline or a skirt that I like, I continuously use that. And I've gotten to the stage now with my sewing that I just go, oh yep, I know that pattern piece, I'm going to use that in the top, I'll use a sleeve out of this one, and I'll use the skirt portion out of another one. So usually I'll just sift through this box and go, oh yes, this is close enough, and then I can alter from that base pattern, because I know that that fits my body and I know that it looks good. Because otherwise you have to go through a continuous process of lots of fitting, and it really drags out the time of that 13 hours if you have to do a lot more fittings when you haven't worked with a pattern before and you have to do a lot of alterations. So today for this dress from that sketch that I showed, so for this top, I knew that I wanted it structured and it needed really high neck in that, so I ended up going for this design. So it has, you know, seams through the bodice. I've used this pattern 1,000 times. I love it. It fits me really well. It's a drop waist, which is something that I like because I have a very long body. So, you know, coming down to the very bottom of my waist helps elongate my body. And then we've ended up going for this drop waist in this pattern. So the only part of this pattern that I actually need is this band here, so I can get the darts and everything in the skirt in the right position. And then the bottom piece is just a long rectangle that's gathered and put together. But, you know, a lot of these things, I just look at the shape and then alter from there, because, you know, this skirt, I know that on my body, I like an 84 centimeter skirt, because that cuts me right at the bottom of my calf muscle, and that makes my legs, you know, feel like they go up slim from that position. So that's my favorite length. So I'll always do the math to say, right, from my hip to the drop is 35 centimeters, and then to get to 84 centimeters, that's the bottom part of the skirt that I use. So they're the only two patterns. Oh no, sorry. And then for the collar and the sleeve, so basically what I did was with this sleeve here, I used that pattern, but I actually extended out the center and then just put a gathering stitch in it to bring it back to that space, which I'll explain when we lay all the pattern pieces out on the table with that. So I literally used that, and then I did some measurements on my body to say, okay, well, I know I want it to come down to this point before I have my cuff. and did the measurements that way. So it's a lot of math, but I like math, being an engineer, which is good. So yeah, two pattern pieces from this, and then the rest was just deciding different little trims and things through math. So as I was talking about earlier about matching up seams, so you can see here that, you know, we've got a seam going through here, but I wanted to definitely make sure that I had this dark green continuation to make sure it was fine. And you can see here this flower, I've tried to match this seam to make sure that it continues out. And you notice that with the different types of shops that you go into and their price points. For example, you know, if you go into a lower end market shop and you buy a spotty dress or a stripy dress, and like nothing disappoints me more than when the fabric's been cut and it's like cut directly between a spot, or like the stripes aren't lining up properly. So that's something that Janine, my mum, and I are very pedantic about, you know, not cutting the shapes of the fabric to not match properly. So that's something that definitely adds on time when you are cutting out fabrics. So talking about time frames for the overall process of this dress. So the cutting out is roughly 2 to 3 hours because of that additional time that it takes to match up seams properly when you're really putting the effort into that. The actual construction phase of sewing, because it is a fully lined dress, it's probably about 10 hours of construction for me. You know, I'm not a professional seamstress who, you know, they could be a lot quicker than what I am, but that's what the time of this dress is taking for me to do. Yeah, so if you look at it overall, it's about 13 hours of work that's gone into this. And then you usually have a little bit of additional time as well for hand stitching all of your lining under the seams in your arms and around the hip in this area as well. It will need hand stitching. And this dress also has over 25 buttons on it, which I'm very excited to show you. So we've got the dress to, I would say, 90% finished now. So you can see we've got this beautiful cuff sleeve. Now, this sleeve at the bottom is actually only just a rectangle, and then this is a rectangle as well that I've gathered in to be the space of that sleeve. And I've interfaced this because I want it to have good structure, where this, you know, Italian silk is so fine that, you know, it needs a bit of structure. So yes, the dress is at 90% finished, but now I have to put the lining in. So you can see this collar, I'm so excited to do that and add the buttons as well. So you can see that this top, basically I've made that exactly out of a lining as well. Now, lining is something that I don't really like to cheap out on either, because you get that really nice feel on your body. And you know, some patterns and dresses that you buy in the shop, you'll see that they just have like a facing around the shoulders and the neckline, but I just find it looks so much tidier when you just completely line the whole thing, because then all you see when you open up the dress is just, you know, a completely made bodice, which is really nice. So when we talk about attaching this in, you can see that this fabric frays quite a lot. You know, you can overlock everything if you want to, but really I'm about to tuck all of that fraying into the inside of this dress. So that's something that you have to be really careful with when you work with such a fine silk, is it frays really quickly and it slips really quickly under the foot. So probably not a fabric that I'd use if I was a beginner. Yeah, it definitely takes some practice. So literally what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to sew this lining straight in along the seam, and then you just take the neckline and you're going to tuck everything, like all the collar, in under there as well, and sew all the way up the zip along the neckline, and then you just tuck it in and over and it sits in beautifully. And then I'll just end up turning under the seam here in the sleeve and hand stitching along that. And the lining on the dress, you can see that that's the skirt. It comes down to this point. So I'll hand stitch in underneath that as well. So yeah, we've got the lining to go, and then just the beautiful buttons that I'm gonna have sitting all the way between this beautiful extended collar, buttons lining all the way down there, and buttons on the sleeve. So now you can see that we've tucked that lining completely inside this dress, so everything just sits really nicely now. You can see along the seam. So the only thing I have to do now is like fold this under and hand stitch it into the seam so this sleeve looks nice and neat. But yeah, you can see everything right down to the zip looks nice and neat from the inside as well, and that'll help this collar to really sit nicely in the front. So my next stage is I've got these beautiful buttons that perfectly tone with this color that I've decided to accentuate from the fabric. So these are gonna sit all the way down the front of the dress, 1.5 inch spacing, and it's gonna come right up to sit between the collar here as well, right down the front. And then I'm also going to put these, I've got enough to do some along the cuff as well. So we're gonna have buttons matching on the cuff. And that's basically it. So I think, you know, I've probably got an hour's worth of work left to sew the buttons. One other point that I find very interesting about sewing dresses is, you know, to get the bodice through the skirt done as a simple design, I could probably sew that together in 3 hours. But then when you start talking about this statement collar, when you start talking about gathering along a sleeve and a cuff and having to interface all of that, I would say it takes double the amount of time to have those like real designer features on a dress. So, you know, if I'm just sewing a simple dress, no problem, very quick process, but it takes double the amount of time, you know, 5 hours or so to do just the accessories on the dress that makes it, you know, that statement piece that you can buy in a shop, but it's very expensive to buy in a shop, and it makes it unique to be wearing that.